It started like any other flight. Passengers quietly settled into their seats, some yawning from early wake-up calls, others already tapping away on laptops or lost in playlists. The cabin buzzed with the low hum of small talk, carry-ons being stuffed into overhead bins and the occasional baby fussing. But what happened next would flip the world of one airline upside down, costing them not only their reputation, but a $1.5 billion partnership they never saw slipping through their fingers. In seat 14A, a tall black man with a neatly trimmed beard and wire-framed glasses sat quietly, scribbling inside a well-worn leather notebook. His name was Dr. Elijah Carr, a name not many on that flight recognized, but in the world of cutting-edge energy research, it carried weight. What he had in that notebook wasn't just a bunch of thoughts or doodles. It was the backbone of a revolutionary, technology that could change how the world thinks about sustainable energy. He was on his way to finalize a landmark deal with a major airline, one that could reshape air travel forever. But none of that mattered to the flight crew. To them, he was just another passenger, one they didn't think twice about. He wasn't wearing a suit. He didn't flash a fancy business card, and when he politely asked for a cup of water before takeoff, he got an eye roll instead of service. Still, Dr. Carr didn't complain. He was used to being underestimated. He was used to the whispers, the stares, the sideways glances whenever he pulled out that notebook full of complex equations and ideas most people couldn't even begin to understand. The trouble started when one flight attendant noticed him writing furiously in that book and leaned over to whisper something to her colleague. The second crew member walked past him twice, then smirked and chuckled as she passed again. It was subtle, but Dr. Carr noticed. At first he ignored it. Maybe they were having a rough morning. Maybe it had nothing to do with him. But then, they started getting louder. A snide comment about scribbling spells, another about secret codes, and one that hit harder than the rest. Some people bring books, others bring drama. Passengers nearby started looking. One woman clutched her purse tighter. A man in a suit leaned forward, trying to catch a glimpse of what Dr. Carr was writing. The flight attendants didn't stop. One even asked him, with a fake smile and syrupy voice, if he needed help finding his way to the right section of the plane. Dr. Carr simply closed his notebook and folded his hands. He didn't argue. He didn't snap back. But something changed in the air around him. A silence settled in, one that made even the nearby passengers uneasy. Just a few rows behind, a teenager had been watching everything. His name was Jordan, a 17-year-old high school senior with dreams of becoming an engineer. He had boarded the flight alone, heading to visit his grandmother before starting a summer internship. When the pregnant woman in the row beside him showed signs of discomfort, he stood up without hesitation and offered her his seat. It seemed like a small act. But that moment, Jordan giving up his seat with a smile while the flight crew mocked a man trying to change the world, was about to spark a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The woman who sat down in Jordan's place noticed the tension in the cabin. She saw the way the flight attendants whispered and pointed. She noticed Dr. Carr's hands trembling slightly as he tried to reopen his notebook. She said nothing at first, just watched, listened, and remembered. Jordan, now in a different seat. Further back, glanced forward every so often, confused by the shift in mood. He didn't know the man in 14A. He had no idea what was in that notebook. But something about the way Dr. Carr carried himself, even in the face of quiet humiliation, stuck with him. Then came the breaking point. A third crew member, unaware of what had already happened, approached Dr. Carr and casually asked him to put the notebook away. "It's making people uncomfortable," she said, as if explaining why peanuts couldn't be served. When Dr. Carr asked if he was breaking a rule, she just shrugged. "It's just better if you don't." That's when the woman in Jordan's seat leaned forward. Her voice, calm but firm, cut through the tension like a blade. "Are you aware of who he is?" she asked. "Do you have any idea what's in that notebook?" The flight attendant blinked, caught off guard. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it does," the woman said, pulling out her phone and typing quickly. "You just insulted the lead scientist in a project your airline is supposed to be funding. I hope someone at corporate is ready to answer for this." The name she typed into her phone connected to headlines, research papers, and major press releases. Within minutes, the cabin crew's smirks faded. The attitude shifted. But it was too late. By the time the plane landed, the story was already spreading. Online, in group chats, across the inboxes of corporate executives who woke up to news that their multi-billion-dollar clean energy deal was at risk. And in the back of that same plane, Jordan, the teen who had quietly given up his seat without expecting anything in return, found something strange tucked inside his bag. A handwritten note from the woman he had helped earlier. Its words would change his life forever. But what exactly did that note say? And what would happen when the airline tried to do damage control, not knowing that the man they mocked had already started speaking to their biggest competitor? Stay tuned. Jordan stared at the note in his hands, confused at first. It was folded, neatly, the paper thick like it came from a special kind of notepad. The handwriting was careful, with just a hint of elegance. He looked around to see if the woman was still nearby, but she had already stepped off the plane, lost in the crowd. For a second, he thought about tossing the note aside, assuming it was just a polite thank you. But something about how deliberately it was tucked into his bag, something about the way she had looked at him before exiting, made him pause. He slipped it into his pocket without reading it just yet. His mind was too full. He kept thinking about the man with the notebook. The quiet dignity. The way the flight attendants had laughed like it was all just a joke. Jordan knew what that felt like, being dismissed. Looked at funny when you didn't match what people expected. He'd grown up hearing the words smart and black thrown around like they didn't belong in the same sentence. So when he saw Dr. Carr being treated that way, it stirred something in him. A memory he didn't know he was carrying. Outside the terminal, news had already started to move. A blurry photo someone took mid-flight, Dr. Carr with his head down, a crew member standing over him, had made its way to a local journalist's inbox. The woman who'd sat in Jordan's seat? She wasn't just a pregnant traveler. Her name was Emily Grant, a corporate compliance advisor with deep ties in the aviation industry. She had recognized Dr. Carr the moment she sat down. She had been briefed on his research months ago when her own company considered investing in his clean fuel project. The deal hadn't gone through back then, but she had read enough to know what he represented and how valuable he was. Emily didn't just type his name into a search engine. She made a phone call, then another. And by the time she left the airport, 3 executives from the airline's board were already receiving emergency texts. One of them opened a message containing a headline: Airline in talks for $1.5 billion. Clean fuel deal now in jeopardy after mid-flight incident. Meanwhile, Dr. Carr had made no scene. He walked off the plane in silence, not because he was defeated, but because he had seen this kind of thing too many times before. Being doubted, underestimated, and mocked had always been part of his journey. The beginning, when he was just a kid with wild ideas and hand-me-down textbooks, teachers would question his notes just like that flight crew had. One teacher even accused him of copying someone else's homework because his answers were too advanced. He had learned early on that brilliance in the wrong skin could look suspicious to some people. He didn't let it stop him. He built his reputation. From the ground up, never once asking for credit he didn't earn. His clean fuel model wasn't a fantasy. It was real, tested, peer-reviewed, and weeks away from being patented. And now, because of one moment of small-minded cruelty, the very company that was supposed to back him might lose everything. But the part they didn't realize was that Dr. Carr hadn't signed anything yet. The ink was dry on their proposal, but he hadn't touched his pen. Back at the terminal, Jordan waited for his ride while replaying everything in his head. The smirks, the whispers, and most of all, the way Dr. Carr never lashed out, not once. There was something powerful about that. He finally unfolded the note. At first, the words didn't register. Then his eyes widened. Your kindness will take you further than you know. You gave something simple but precious. Your seat. It may not seem like much, but that choice told me who you are. If you're serious about your dreams, call this number. Don't wait. At the bottom was a phone number, and underneath that, a name. Emily Grant. Jordan didn't know who she was, not really, but something about her message hit him hard. He'd grown up in a neighborhood where dreams got delayed, sometimes buried. He had worked hard in school, stayed out of trouble, took every science elective they offered. He wanted to build things, solve problems, change the world in ways most people thought impossible. But resources were slim, connections were even slimmer. Now somehow he was holding a note from a stranger who seemed to see him in a way few people ever had. But he didn't call. Not yet. He needed to think because something told him that phone call wouldn't just change his life. It would pull him deeper into something much bigger than he ever expected. At the same time, the airline's executive team gathered behind closed doors. They had no idea the scale of the storm brewing. In their minds, it was a minor PR issue, a flight crew being unprofessional. A statement could be drafted, a few apologies sent, maybe some training sessions scheduled. But what they didn't know was that their competitors were already calling Dr. Carr. One in particular had read about his fuel model months ago, but couldn't match the offer he'd been promised. Now they saw a second chance. All they had to do was treat him with respect. And so, within 24 hours, two very different threads began to pull tighter. One, a high school senior with a dream and a decision to make. The other, a brilliant scientist who had just been humiliated on a plane, but held the future of air travel in his hands. Neither of them fully understood yet just how deeply their lives had already intertwined. And back at the airline's office, someone finally asked, the question that would haunt them for months. Wait, who was he again? By the time they got the answer, it was already too late. Dr. Elijah Carr sat alone in the back of a quiet coffee shop, notebook closed for once, staring at the steam rising from his untouched drink. His phone buzzed every few seconds. Calls from industry leaders, messages from journalists, emails from corporate offices that were all suddenly eager to listen. But he didn't touch any of them. Not yet. Not when the sting of that flight was still fresh in his chest. It wasn't just about disrespect. It was something deeper, something that had followed him his entire life. People had smiled to his face in boardrooms, praised his intellect in articles, but when it came down to how they treated him in everyday life, nothing had changed. He had been preparing to give that airline the future. He had run the numbers 100 times. His fuel model could reduce long-haul flight emissions by 40%, cut costs by nearly 30%, and open the door for a sustainable aviation market worth billions. And all he wanted was a fair partnership, one where he didn't have to explain himself or fight to be heard. But that flight made everything clear. If they couldn't respect him when he was just a man in a seat, how could he trust them with the dream he had built from nothing? Across the city, in a glass-walled office overlooking the skyline, the airline's executive team met in a tense emergency session. The incident had gone viral, faster than expected. The photos weren't the worst part. It was the story. The way it spread. A respected black scientist being mocked mid-flight, only for it to be discovered he was the architect of the company's biggest upcoming innovation. Headlines screamed it across the internet. Airline mocks own billion-dollar scientist. Clean energy deal threatened after racially charged incident. The board members argued over damage control. One suggested offering Dr. Carr a public apology and a formal award. Another pushed for replacing the flight crew and announcing new diversity initiatives. But none of them wanted to admit the truth, that what happened wasn't a mistake. It was a reflection of a culture they had never really confronted, and now it was costing them. Meanwhile, Jordan sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, still staring at the number on that note. He hadn't told anyone about it yet. Not his mom, who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Not his science teacher, who always told him he had a shot at something bigger. The idea of calling felt both exciting and terrifying. What if it led nowhere? What if it changed everything? He didn't know who Emily Grant really was, but she had seen something in him, something most people overlooked. He opened his laptop and searched her name. Dozens of articles popped up: corporate compliance advisor, aviation ethics specialist, consultant for 3 of the largest transportation companies in the country. She wasn't just someone with connections. She was someone who made decisions. And she had seen value in his simple act of kindness. He started to dial, then stopped. What would he even say? Back in the coffee shop, Dr. Carr finally opened one of the emails. It was from a smaller airline, a regional carrier looking to expand their routes sustainably. They'd heard about his fuel model before, but had lacked the funds to compete. Now their tone had changed. "We believe in your work. We believe in you. Let's build something better together." It wasn't the money that caught his attention. It was the sincerity. Another message followed, this one from a group of young engineers in California. They had seen the story and reached out not to pitch, but to support. "You've been our inspiration since we were undergrads," the message said. "Don't let them bury this moment. Let it be a spark." It was the kind of response Dr. Carr wasn't used to. Not from strangers, not from peers. For a moment, he wondered if the firestorm surrounding the flight had finally cracked something open, something bigger than him. But not everyone was celebrating. Inside the original airline, whispers started to spread among staff. Some crew members defended their co-workers, saying it was all being blown out of proportion. Others began coming forward quietly, sharing stories of similar incidents that had never made it to the press. Flight attendants, maintenance staff, gate agents. All of them had stories of being talked down to, overlooked or worse, especially those who looked like Dr. Carr. Emily Grant watched the fallout unfold from her office downtown. She'd sent the note to Jordan because she believed small moments mattered. She had seen too many boardrooms built on talent they didn't understand. And when Jordan stood up and gave his seat away without hesitation, she saw something rare. A heart not hardened by pride, but shaped by instinct to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. She picked up her phone and called Dr. Carr. "I don't want to talk about the airline," she said once he answered. Dr. Carr didn't respond right away. "I want to talk about building something better," she continued. "And I want to introduce you to someone, a young man, smart, humble, just like you were once." Dr. Carr raised an eyebrow. "Is that right?" "He gave up his seat," she said, "and got a piece of the future instead." Dr. Carr smiled faintly. "What's his name?" "Jordan." And just like that, the threads began to tie tighter. The airline's PR team scrambled to schedule interviews, release statements, and calm investors. But investors weren't the only ones watching. Activists had picked up the story. So had scientists. So had students across the country. It wasn't just about one man with a notebook anymore. It was about how often brilliance got overlooked, because it didn't look the way people expected. How often power was blind to humility. In a quiet room, Jordan finally hit call. The phone rang once, twice, then connected. He took a deep breath. "Hello, this is Jordan. You left me a note."